Chapter 6, entitled, This Life We Have Chosen. And it starts with a quote by Marie that says, "There can be no doubt of the existence of these new elements, but to make chemists admit their existence, it was necessary to isolate them." Now to the text. In spite of the clear evidence of distinct rays, both from polonium and radium, this is not the absolute proof required in the field of chemistry. The elements must have an atomic weight. If the decision had been up to Pierre, he would have moved on to other things and let someone else find the atomic weight. Irene later explains, Pierre Curie was attracted above all by fascinating problems posed by the mysterious rays emitted by these new materials. Marie Curie had the stubborn desire to see salts of pure radium to measure radium's atomic weight. Marie is not going to rest, literally, until she can fill in the atomic weights for the periodic table. They will focus first on radium. Jean Perrin writes 22 years later, "It is not an exaggeration to say today that the isolation of radium is the cornerstone on which the entire edifice of radioactivity rests." As an aside, for two reasons, the discovery of radium will outshine polonium. Polonium, having such a short life, will prove next to impossible to isolate, and it has no immediate value for the industrial world. Back to the text. The Curies divide their work. Pierre takes on the physics by exploring the origin and nature of radium's activity. Marie takes on the chemistry. Starting with small quantities of pitchblende ore, Marie realizes this won't suffice. To find the atomic weight, the Curies will need tons of pitchblende. Marie writes, "The results of our experiment proved that there were, in reality, new radioactive elements in pitchblende, but that their proportion did not even reach a millionth of a percent." Marie will now embark on the most physically demanding task in the history of scientific research. She will extract 1/4 teaspoon of radium salts from 200 tons of pitchblende. Marie and Pierre have been using their money to buy large quantities of pitchblende to continue their research. The quantity they need now exceeds their budget. The Curies are told the Austrian government has been mining pitchblende and extracting the uranium, because they use that to make color in pottery. The remnants, several tons of pitchblende slag, are piled in the woods. Stripped of uranium, this pitchblende is worthless to the Austrians. For the Curies, the slag, minus its uranium, is exactly what they need. Being worthless to the Austrian government makes it affordable for the Curies. The Austrians are persuaded to give the first ton to the Curies, but they don't cover the transportation. With no financial support from the Science Society, the Curies use their own money to cover this expense. Later, the Curies are able to have the pitchblende delivered due to the financial support of Baron Edmund de Rothschild. As an aside, this is an example of the disadvantage for the Curies not being a member for the Society of Science. The Society usually provides funds for such research and expenses. The first sacks of pitchblende arrive in early 1899, and Marie writes, "How glad I was when the sacks arrived with the brown dust mixed with pine needles, and when the activity, the radioactivity, proved even greater than that of the primitive ore. It was a stroke of luck that the residues had not been thrown far away." Aside from needing tons of pitchblende, the more difficult problem is finding a place to work. The bureaucrats in charge of the Sorbonne buildings say no to Pierre's request for a room. The School of Physics, where Pierre is teaching, comes through for them. Although Pierre's new boss has petty grievances against Pierre, and so what is offered is less than optimal. The room is a shack that had been used by medical students to store and dissect cadavers. They abandoned the shack, declaring the building unfit. The roof has skylights that leak. The floor is bitumen, which is a black mixture used for road surfacing and roofing. The minimal furnishings, a preference for the Curie's apartment, so that part's okay, but they're not okay for a laboratory. They're drawbacks. Accessories include several old plank kitchen tables and a blackboard. There are no shelves for their equipment and no heater except for a cast iron stove with a rusty pipe. After a German chemist visits the Curie's laboratory, he writes, "It was like a stable or a root cellar. If I hadn't seen the work table with its chemical equipment, I would have thought this was a practical joke." End quote. And Marie remembers of this time. She writes, "And yet it was in this miserable old shed that the best and happiest years of our life were spent, entirely consecrated to work. I sometimes passed the whole day stirring a mass of ebullition with an iron rod nearly as big as myself. In the evening I was broken with fatigue. This went on for 4 years." End quote. The laboratory is sweltering in the summer and freezing in the winter. The chemical treatments they use include hydrogen sulfide, which is a toxic gas. Having no exhaust fans in the shack, Marie works outside in the courtyard. After months of processing the pitch blend, the final stages of solution come down to crystallizing in rows of petri dishes, which are named after J.R. Petrie, who was a bacteriologist. The samples must be protected from dust and the particles of coal coming from fire in the stove. On rainy days, the samples and the equipment need to be moved away from water dripping from the ceiling. Marie's only complaints are, "It is true that the discovery of radium was made in precarious conditions. The shed which sheltered it seemed clouded in the charms of legend, but its romantic element was not an advantage. It wore out our strength and delayed our accomplishment. With better means, the first 5 years of our work might have been reduced to 2, and their tension lessened." End quote. In front of the shack are 800 bags of pitch blend at 25 pounds each. This isn't romantic. It's hard manual labor. A quote written 85 years later by a chemistry professor, Robert L. Wolke. The chemical separation and fractional crystallizations that they, the Curies, employed were nothing short of heroic in scale. Courageous is neither too strong nor too romantic a word to use for the woman who designed and led this incredibly difficult quest. End quote. Marie describes this quest for her and Pierre and says, "The life of a great scientist in his laboratory is not, as many may think, a peaceful ideal. More often it is a bitter battle with one's surroundings, and above all, with oneself. A great discovery does not leap completely achieved from the brain of the scientist, as Minerva sprang all panoplied from the head of Jupiter. It is the fruit of accumulated preliminary work. Between the days of fecund productivity are inserted days of uncertainty, when nothing seems to succeed, and when even matter itself seems hostile. And it is then that one must hold out against discouragement. Thus, without ever forsaking his inexhaustible patience, Pierre used to sometimes say to me, 'It is nevertheless hard, this life we have chosen.'" End quote. Aside from time at the laboratory shack, the Curies prepare weekly lessons for classes, teach and oversee lab work for students. Regardless, Marie is determined to stay in the lead of their research. Ernest Rutherford writes his mother and says, Right now I'm very busy writing up some notes for publication and doing new experiments. I can't stop. There are always people trying to overtake me. My most formidable adversaries in this field are Becquerel and the Curies in Paris, who have done very important work on radioactive bodies during the past few years." End quote. Later, when Rutherford sees the shack in a typical British fashion, he comments, "You know, it must be dreadful not to have a laboratory to play around in." End quote. And as an aside, when industry takes over the process of extracting radium for the results of getting 1 gram, which is the 1/4 teaspoon of radium crystals, listen to this, it takes 500 tons of ore, 500 tons of chemicals, 1,000 tons of coal, 10,000 tons of purified and distilled water, the labor equivalent of 350 men working full-time for a month. Back to the text. So, in a simplified explanation, here is the process to isolate radium. I call it Marie's recipe for radium salts. Step 1. 2 sacks of pitchblende, approximately 50 pounds each. Pour into a big cauldron, add a strong alkali and boil over fire. Stir with a 5-foot long iron pole. Note, each ton of pitchblende will require 50 tons of rinsing water. Step 2. Keeping the residue that is left after boiling, apply chemicals that continue to reduce the residue, clearing it of other components. And that would be the 99% that has been accounted for in the pitchblende. Place tiny amounts of this solution in rows of petri dishes and allow the liquid to evaporate. This leaves crystals. Redissolve the crystal in a liquid and wait for the liquid to evaporate. Crystals are formed again, with a little more of the barium evaporated away, and the sample is even a little more pure. Step 3. Test what is radioactive, keep that. What is not radioactive, toss out. Step 4. Repeat steps 1 through 3 hundreds of times until pure radium chloride is obtained. Marie writes of those few years of pure research, and she says, "A great tranquility reigned in our poor shabby hangar. Occasionally, while observing an operation, we would walk up and down talking about our work, present and future. When we were cold, a cup of hot tea drunk beside the stove cheered us. We lived in a preoccupation as complete as that of a dream." And Marie continues, "We saw only very few people at the laboratory. Among the physicists and chemists, there were a few who came from time to time, either to see our experiments or to ask for advice from Pierre Curie, whose competence in several branches of physics was well known." End quote. After Irene is put to bed, Marie remembers, "We would sometimes come back in the evening after dinner to look in our domain. Our precious products, for which we had no shelter, were set out on tables and boards. We could see their faintly luminous silhouettes all around us, and these glowing lights, which seemed to be suspended in the darkness, always thrilled and delighted us all over again. And Pierre, he tells Marie, 'I should like it to have a beautiful color.' Well, he's not disappointed. While pure radium salts are colorless, the radiation that it gives off is a bluish mauve tint. In time, there will be enough radiation in the rows of small petri dishes that the bluish mauve colors glow in the shack." Throughout 1899, this singular focus of the Curies is impairing their health. Aside from not eating well or getting enough rest, Pierre and Marie are noticing their fingertips become hard and painful after handling containers of radioactive material. And actually, 100 years later, the Curie's personal items and articles from their laboratory, they are still radioactive. Their daughter Eve remembers, "The days of work became months and years. Pierre and Marie were not discouraged. The material which resisted them, which defended its secret, fascinated them. United by their tenderness, united by their intellectual passions, they had, in a wooden shack, the anti-natural existence for which they had both been made. The Curies are also beginning to garner recognition in the public. Doctors are recognizing that radium salts can be used to reduce cancerous tumors. The Curies provide these salts and treatments, and that becomes known as Curie therapy. On Sunday afternoons, young research scientists gather at the Curie's home. One of them is Paul Langevin, Pierre's former student. Another is André de Buren. De Buren is hired by the Curies as an assistant. He is a chemist and will later discover another radioactive element, actinium, which is also in the pitchblende residue. Marie is hired to teach at the Normal School of Severs, which is an elite preparatory school for women to become teachers in France. With an all-male staff, Marie is the first woman to be on the faculty. The school, not wanting to overcome all sexist standards, allows Marie to teach only the first and second year students. The start of the school year is difficult. The students, disdainful of having a woman as their teacher, make fun of Marie's Polish accent, and they sing a small ditty that makes fun of her, and it goes like this. Wouldn't she be better off cooking for her husband prof, instead of talking in a stream to a class that's bored enough to scream? Marie recognizes many of the 20-year-old students are not able to follow the level of math she is teaching. Like Marie's early education, the women have not been taught the necessary preparatory classes. The women will learn now with Marie. The students will also work in the laboratory. Most of the students have never touched a piece of equipment, let alone worked in a laboratory. Marie doubles the length of her class so her students have time to do more experimental work. And later, one of her students writes about her. She held us with her simplicity, her desire to be useful to us, the sense she had of both our ignorance and our possibilities. End quote. By the second year, Marie's students are performing their own experiments, and they adore her. Another student writes, but in the case of Madame Curie, we didn't wait for the ringing of the bell. We watched from our windows for the arrival of the professor, and as soon as we saw her little gray dress at the end of the alley of Chestnut Streets, we ran to take our seats in the conference room. The temperature in the shack reads 100.22 Fahrenheit, which is, 100 degrees is really hot, which is 37.9 Celsius. Marie is continuing to condense the solutions. July 23rd, Marie writes, quote, pure radium in the dish. But on the 27th, she writes in her notebook, the weight of an atom of radium is 174. Then Marie writes, it's impossible. She knows something in her operations is not accurate, and that 2 years of work and 8 tons of pitchblende are gone. There is no record of questioning what the next step is. The next step for Marie is clear. She must start again. And here's a quote she has. One never notices what has been done. One can only see what remains to be done. The lost time and resources will not stop the Curies, and neither will their loss of health, tight finances, and dilapidated laboratory. Pierre is having pain in his legs, which the doctors have diagnosed as rheumatism. Marie is losing weight and her skin is pale. Dr. Curie has her tested for tuberculosis. Marie writes of their budget, quote, we have to be careful, and my husband's salary isn't quite enough to live on. But up to now, we have had several unexpected additional sources of income each year, which means we have no deficit. And of the shack, Marie writes, its deplorable state. In our laboratory, the situation has become acute, and we no longer have any apparatus properly insulated. In other words, everything has been contaminated with radiation. If you're wondering what that noise was, that's my dog. He's upstairs with me all the time. He's 165 pounds, so when he snores, it's significant. There is some relief when a chemical company offers to take over the initial processes to refine the radium. André de Bierne is put in charge to supervise the factory operations. Marie, no longer stirring solutions in a cauldron over an open fire, can focus on the final, meticulous stages of distilling the samples. Marie and Pierre are busy documenting their work. Between 1900 and 1903, the Curies published more than 30 papers. The 1900 World's Fair, held in Paris, is attended by over 50 million visitors who are flabbergasted with the possibilities of electricity and agog with electric lights. They have no idea that concurrent to the World's Fair is the Physics Congress, already discussing the next generation of energy, nuclear. At the Physics Congress, the Curies and their radioactive elements are the topic du jour. The Curie's paper is entitled Uninduced Radioactivity and Their Gas Activated by Radium. They describe in their paper, quote, radioactivity gradually transmits itself through open air from the radiant material to active bodies, end quote. The fact they need to explain this emphasizes the point of how much is still unknown about radioactivity. France continues to disregard the magnitude of research being done by the Curies, and when the dean of the University of Geneva offers Pierre a physics chair, an annual salary, a housing allowance, and the directorship of a laboratory, the Curies are interested. Pierre is assured there will be a proper laboratory, and the laboratory will have a staff of 2 assistants, equipment request lists will be fulfilled, and Marie will be given an official position in the laboratory. Marie and Pierre visit Geneva, and Pierre accepts the offer. He will finally have the laboratory of his dreams. However, when they return to France, Pierre changes his mind. Pierre, who had left his own research of crystals to support Marie's work, realizes that any interruption in their research will be an irreversible setback. An alternative is to go to Geneva, and when Marie finishes her doctorate, she can join him. Pierre will not take this option. He sends a letter of resignation. Marie later explains, Pierre Curie was very tempted to accept the Swiss offer, and it was the immediate interest of our research into radium that finally made him refuse. The French, worried they will lose the Curies, offer Pierre a teaching position at the School of Physics, Chemistry, and Natural Sciences. True, it is a part of the Sorbonne, but it is not a full staff position, and as such, only adds to his workloads. This puts their finances in a better position, but still no laboratory. Having more classes to teach, prepare more lectures, and including commute time means more time away from their research. Support, albeit belated, is also forthcoming from the French Academy of Sciences. They award the Curies 20,000 francs. The money is used to buy more pitchblende. They still have not isolated polonium or radium to find either atomic weight. And here's an aside too. Marie's work isolating radium metal was the most difficult process known to science. It has never been repeated. Now to the text. By 1902, Marie has succeeded in extracting 1/10 of a gram, which is equivalent to a few grains of sand, of almost pure radium from 200 tons of pitchblende and sandstone. She can finally provide the atomic weight of radium. March 28, 1902, she writes in her black notebook, radium equals 225.92, the weight of an atom of radium. Marie, with her assistant de Bierne, has done it. Having the atomic weight of radium puts it on the chart. She will continue her work, and by 1905 she has 1 gram of radium, and it will be worth $150,000. For Pierre, his professional aspirations to have a proper laboratory are undone again by political games that he refuses to play. A chair in mineralogy is available at the Sorbonne. Pierre, with his prior work in crystalline physics, is once more the perfect choice, and once more he is not given the post. He writes a friend, "I regret, when it is all said, having lost time in paying visits for the brilliant result." In the same year, 1902, Pierre is encouraged by friends to apply once more for the open seat in the Academy of Science. This, too, requires precious time away from his work, and again the vote goes to a lesser candidate. Pierre just doesn't fit. He won't dance to the Academy's tune. A colleague who does support Pierre is recommending him for the prestigious Legion of Honor award. Marie encourages Pierre to accept the recommendation. Pierre responds, "Inform him that I do not feel the slightest need of being decorated, but I am in the greatest need of a laboratory." Marie writes about the reckoning of the scientists and their sacrifices to science, and she says, more often, before they can secure possible working conditions, they have to exhaust their youth and their power in daily anxieties. Neither public-owned powers nor private generosity actually accord to science and to scientists the support and the subsidiaries indispensable to fully effective work. The toll of Marie's work is affecting her sleep. She is starting to sleepwalk. In May, Marie receives a message from her family in Warsaw. Her father is deathly ill. Marie takes a train home to Poland, but does not arrive in time. Marie is beside herself with grief and insists the coffin be opened so she can see her father one last time. The anguish of losing her dear father keeps sweeping over Marie as she weeps. It is Bronya who must pull Marie away. Vladislav had dedicated his life to helping his children succeed. The risks he was willing to take were offset with his sense of caution born out of years of living under Russian rule. 6 days before he died, Vladislav had written to Marie and said, "You are now in possession of pure radium salts. If we consider the amount of work done in obtaining this, it would certainly be the most expensive of chemical elements. What a pity it is that this work has only theoretical interests." End quote. Curie therapy and its potential for combating cancer is just developing, and he never saw a chance to see it. Marie, seeing past the necessity of a pragmatic view by her father, writes later, "My father, who in his own youth had wished to do scientific work, was consoled by the progressive success of my work." In September, Marie returns to Paris. As an aside, at this time, the Curies know that radium causes local burns, but the more serious and systemic effects are unknown. Pierre exposes his arm to radium and lesions appear. Marie has radium in a sealed tube she is carrying around in her pocket. This leaves burns on her skin. They have postulated that by destroying diseased cells, radium could cure certain forms of cancer. Collaborating with physicians, these studies result in radium therapy. Tubes of radon are used by doctors to destroy diseased cells in skin cancer, and the epidermis that is destroyed grows back healthy. This leads to the media frenzy of radium cures. Back to the text. June 1903. Pierre is asked to lecture at London's Royal Institute, founded in 1799. This organization, the British equivalent of the Academy of Science for Paris, is upstaging the Parisians for thus far having denied Pierre entrance and invitation to speak at their Paris Academy. In England, the Curies meet the scientists Sir William Crookes, Lord Raleigh, Sir Oliver Lodge, H.E. Lancaster, Ray Lancaster, Professor William Ayrton, and Lord Kelvin. And you remember Lord Kelvin, he had known Pierre before. All of them had doubted that radium was a new element. They cannot doubt radium now, and they cannot doubt Marie's part in the discovery. During the lecture, Pierre mentions 4 times Marie's role in their work. Marie has the pleasure of hearing Pierre's lecture. She is the first woman to be admitted to the sessions of the Royal Institution. During Pierre's demonstration of the radium, he shows the audience the radium burn scar on his arm. He tells them, quote, "The action of radium on nervous centers may result in paralysis or death. They seem to act with particular intensity on living tissues in the process of growth," end quote. He stresses that radium has possible therapeutic value in treating lupus and cancer. When Pierre shows the audience a small tube that holds a solution of radium, the audience can see the glow of the radium. Pierre says, "Look, this is the light of the future." As an aside, Pierre spills a minuscule amount, and 50 years later, the radioactivity in the building is still high enough that the building has to go through a decontamination. Back to the text. Marie and Pierre, honored as guests at several society receptions, keep their priorities and don't trip over themselves to be in step with fashion. Marie is wearing her one formal black dress that she has been using for the last 10 years. Pierre comments to Marie after one of the extravagant events, and he says, "Do you know, during dinner, when I didn't know what to think about, I discovered a game. I calculated how many laboratories could be built with the stones that each woman present was wearing around her neck. When the time for the speeches arrived, I had gotten up to an astronomical number of buildings. In this era of society, when guests at receptions have a valet to help them dress, Pierre could legitimately use some help. He is very ill and having trouble changing into his formal evening attire. For Marie, if she was a woman of society, she would have stayed home. Society ladies don't appear in public when they are with child. Aside from expecting their second baby, Marie finds it discomforting when crowds are staring at her as a curiosity, a woman physicist. One person who understands Marie's unease is the research scientist Hertha Ayrton, and that's the wife of Professor Ayrton. Hertha, like Marie, is from Poland. Marie can share with Hertha the frustration of unwanted gawking and the disdain of being seen as a foreigner. What Marie doesn't share is the additional disregard Hertha must navigate because she is the daughter of a Jew. And as an aside about Hertha, she studied mathematics at Girton College, Cambridge, and finished her studies in 1880. Ayrton is only awarded a certificate from Cambridge since they still had a policy of no degrees for women. She receives a degree instead from the University of London, though, in 1881. Back to the text. Returning from London 6 days later, Marie defends her doctoral thesis. Her name is listed as Madame Sklodowska-Curie. Bronia comes from Poland to attend the event, but first, she must take Marie to a dressmaker. Marie wants the new dress to be appropriate for working in the laboratory. Not much has changed since her wedding day. What has changed for the two sisters is this occasion closes their dreams as young women. After all these years, they both have achieved their goals in education. The morning Marie is to defend her dissertation, which is June 25, 1903. Pierre and Marie ride their bikes to the Sorbonne. 12 years earlier, Marie came to Paris as a new student and lagging behind the power curve. Now, her work and results are ahead of the power curve in the science community. It is the beginning of the atomic age. She presents her paper entitled Researches on Radioactive Substance by Madame Skłodowska Curie. Marie is the first woman in France to receive a PhD in physics. In the audience to hear Marie's presentation are Pierre Gabriel Lippmann, which was Marie's professor and mentor, physicist Jean Perrin, and Paul Langevin. Marie's father-in-law also attends with her students at the women's school. As Marie speaks, she chooses her pronouns carefully to include Pierre. She states, "Our researches upon the new radioactive bodies have given rise to a scientific movement." When Marie finishes, Monsieur Lippmann, the president, announces, quote, "The University of Paris accords you the title of Doctor of Physical Science with the mention of très honorable, very honorable. In the name of the jury, Madame, I wish to express to you all of our congratulation." The auditorium fills with applause for the first woman to break into the male fortress. Lippmann writes, "The findings represented the greatest scientific contribution ever made in a doctoral thesis." Marie's paper is published in science journals in both England and France. Marie and Pierre have a brief conversation whether the radium information should be free or should they patent it. The conversation is finished faster than these two sentences can be typed. They agree the information should be free. And Marie later writes, "Radium is not to enrich anyone. It is an element. It is for all people." Pierre and Marie could have made millions if they had patented radium and the process they used to extract it. Physicists traditionally publish the results of their research, but not always the process. The technique, process, the information is future income for the discoverer. The income source would have ensured the financial security of their daughters and built the laboratory of their dreams. Marie explains, quote, "It would be contrary to the scientific spirit. If our discovery has a commercial future, that is an accident. Radium is going to be used in treating disease. It seems to me impossible to take advantage of that." Years later, Marie is asked if she believed they made the right decision, and she responds, "Yes, I still believe that we have done right." This includes the Curies giving away samples of their radium at no cost. Marie wrote, "Our research on new radioactive substances gave birth to a scientific movement." The demand for radioactive material is international. Marie, Pierre, and Irene leave for a vacation in Brittany. Marie and Pierre are on one of their bicycle jaunts, and this puts Marie into premature labor. Marie is rushed to Paris. She gives birth to a baby girl. Born too early, the baby dies in a few hours. Marie is crushed with grief and guilt. She writes to Bronya, "I had grown so accustomed to the idea of the child that I am absolutely desperate and cannot be consoled. Write to me, I beg of you. If you think I should blame this on general fatigue, for I must admit that I have not spared my strength, and I regret this bitterly, as I have paid dearly for it. The child, a little girl, was in good condition and was living, and I had wanted it so badly." Sorrow for both Pierre and Marie continues. News arrives from Bronya that her second child, their 5-year-old son, had died of tubercular meningitis. The familiar cycle of death, snatching members of her family, haunts Marie. She writes to Joseph, "I can no longer look at my little girl without trembling with terror, and Bronya's grief tears me to pieces." Heartaches and the nature of their work are exacting a price on the Curies. Pierre continues to be very ill and lies awake at night in pain. Marie, anemic and exhausted, has lost 10 pounds. When a friend sees them, he is so shocked at their poor health, he writes Pierre a 10-page letter begging them to take better care of themselves and get some rest. In November of 1903, Pierre and Marie are scheduled to go to London again, this time to receive England's highest award, the Davy Medal. Marie is still ill and mourning the loss of their baby. Pierre goes to London by himself to receive the award. Another award medal will be offered, and the invitation does not include Marie. The medal given is gold and portrays the image of two women. The nominating committee believes that is the only way women should be included. 1901 and 1902, the Curies are nominated for the Nobel Prize in Physics. It is probable they are not given the award at that time because the same men that keep the door closed to women becoming members of science societies guard the gates of the Nobel Prize. However, by 1903, the phrase, "be so good they can't ignore you," comes into play. The Curie's work is so famous they can hardly be ignored and not awarded the Nobel Prize in Physics. No matter, the committee is determined to find a way around Marie. The official letter from the nominating committee is a complete fabrication, with the credit for discovering radioactivity being given solely to Pierre. The letter is written by 4 scientists. 3 of them have been involved directly with Marie's work. One of the signers is Gabriel Lippmann. This is not only Marie's advisor, but a few months earlier, it was Lippmann who had announced Marie being awarded her doctorate with honors and stating, quote, "the findings represented in the greatest scientific contribution ever made in a doctoral thesis." The prize will also be awarded to Henry Becquerel for his initial work. In an example of spin doctors for physics, the award letter states the 2 men, quote, "worked together and separately to procure with great difficulty some decigrams of this precious metal." The committee gives credit to Pierre for isolating polonium and radium and includes Becquerel because it was impossible, quote, "for us to separate the names of the 2 physicists, and therefore we do not hesitate to propose that the Nobel Prize be shared between Mr. Becquerel and Mr. Curie." It would be understandable if the general public maintains a mindset of underestimating Marie. In their ignorance, they keep the opinion that Marie is merely an assistant to Pierre, and that doesn't deserve recognition. But professional colleagues denying what they know, willing to twist the truth rather than acknowledge Marie's work? Clearly, being well educated does not include the courage to speak the truth. One man, Magnus Mitgad Leffler, steps out from the status quo. He is a member of the Nobel Prize Committee, and he alerts Pierre of the intention for the award to exclude Marie. And as an aside about him, Magnus Mitgad Leffler is an early advocate for women's equality. He adds his mother's name to his paternal surname, and he is key in ensuring that Sofia Kovalevskaya, she was a Russian mathematician. He ensures that she is becoming the first full-time professor of mathematics in Stockholm. Back to the text. Marie writes to Leffler, "If it is true that one is seriously thinking about me for the prize, I very much wish to be considered together with Madame Curie with respect to our research on radioactive bodies." End quote. Leffler pressures the committee to include Marie. It would be interesting to know what was said at that meeting, but somehow the decision is changed. November 14th, 1903, the Curies receive a telegram they will be sharing the Nobel Prize for Physics with Becquerel. Pierre responds their acceptance. Marie is the first woman to be awarded a Nobel Prize. More stunning is a woman earning the award in the category of physics, not the more acceptable realm for women being literature or peace. The next time a woman receives a Nobel Prize in science, the award goes once more to Marie in chemistry, and that'll be 1911. There will be no Nobel Prize in Science again for a woman until 1935, and that's like 24 years later, and it will be who? Marie's daughter, Irene. Here, though, as an aside, are some Nobel Prize winners that were women. In 1905, Bertha von Stuttner was a prize in peace. 1909, Selma Lagerlof in literature. 1911 was Marie Curie in chemistry. 1926, Grazia Deledda in literature. 1928, Sigrid Undstedt in literature. 1931, Jane Addams in peace. And then finally in 1935, Irene Joliot Curie in chemistry. Since 1935, there have been numerous Nobel Prizes for women in the categories of peace, literature, or physiology, but there have been only 3 more Nobel Prizes awarded to women in physics or chemistry. December 10, 1903. The Academy of Science of Stockholm makes the official announcement for the Nobel Prize recipients. The Curies are not able to attend due to their teaching commitments, and Marie is still too ill to travel. The Nobel Prize requires recipients to present a lecture. The Curies will not go for another 14 months, the spring of 1905. Becquerel is there, though, in December to accept his prize and to give a lecture. The Curie's gold medal is accepted by the French minister. Traditionally, the split of the monetary prize when awarded to 3 people is each recipient receives an equal amount. Not so for the Curies. They are counted as one, and therefore they are given the same amount as Becquerel. On December 11th, 1903, the day after the public announcement is made, Marie writes her brother, "Dear Joseph, I thank both of you most tenderly for your letters. Don't forget to thank Manusa," which is Joseph's daughter, for her little letter, so well written, which gave me great pleasure. I shall answer her as soon as I have a free moment." End quote. Marie goes on to discuss the details of the Nobel Prize. She does not mention the original intent of the committee to exclude her. She ends her letter with, "I kiss you all tenderly and implore you will not forget me." As an aside, in the biography of Pierre written by Marie, or the biography of Marie written by her daughter Eve, neither Marie nor Eve delve into the initial plan for Marie to be excluded from the Nobel Prize. Marie will challenge her right to research, but she will not challenge the unspoken rule for women to stay silent about their enforced inequality. The monetary award, back to the text. Hold on. All right. The monetary award of 70,000 francs, which is approximately $20,000, is received in January. Pierre can finally leave his teaching job, and they have money to pay for a lab assistant. Marie sends money to her sister, Hella. Bronya and Casimir are given money to help build the sanatorium they have started. Some money is used to buy bonds for the city of Warsaw. Maria gives money to a few of her Polish students, lab assistants, and the poorer students at her school. Marie's childhood French teacher, who lives in Poland, had always hoped to make a return visit to France. Marie sends her money for the trip. The Curies have a modern bathroom put in their house, and one room has new wallpaper. Marie does not leave her new teaching position. She feels strongly that her teaching is a means of supporting women. The Nobel Prize brings some relief to the Curie's finances, but it comes with the price of their privacy. Marie writes to her brother, "We are inundated with letters and with visits from photographers and journalists. One would like to dig into the ground somewhere to find a little peace." Aside from the intrusion of time, the reports from the press are infuriating. The media is more interested in making a story of the Curie's marriage rather than exploring the nature of their discoveries. The Vanity Fair of London writes, quote, "He, Pierre, soon discovered he could not do without her. She fanned the sacred fire in him whenever she saw it dying out." End quote. Marie is portrayed as a poor immigrant girl suffering in a cold apartment as she studies late into the night. Pierre is cast as her saving prince, with Marie portrayed as riding on Pierre's coattails. It's no wonder the public will continue to see Marie in the role of support person. It is inconceivable to the populace that Marie could have accomplished this work. Pierre is the genius, and Marie is only the assistant. And in the New York Herald in 1903, they said, Mrs. Curie is a devoted fellow laborer in her husband's researches and has associated her name with his discoveries. Wow, that's a slam. To the text. A reporter visiting the Curie house for an interview proves his priority is provocation when his story reads, quote, Irene, and that's their baby, Irene ate all alone so that her mother could win the Nobel Prize. Pierre writes his friend Goyer in January, and he says, I wanted to write to you a long time ago. Excuse me if I didn't. It is because of the stupid life I am leading just now. You have seen this sudden fad for radium. This has brought us all the advantages of a moment of popularity. We have been pursued by journalists and photographers of every country on earth. They have even gone so far as to reproduce my daughter's conversation with her nurse and to describe the black and white cat we have at home. Letters and visits from eccentrics, requests for money. There is not a moment of tranquility. Finally, the collectors of autographs, snobs, society people, and even at times scientists have come to see us, and every evening there has been a voluminous correspondence to send off. With such a state of things, I feel myself invaded by a kind of stupor, and yet all this turmoil will not perhaps have been in vain if it results in my getting a chair and a laboratory. End quote. Pierre will soon get the chair position at the Sorbonne. The laboratory won't be up and running for another 10 years. Having their laboratory in the shack, the media pounces on this fodder up for their story, and one article describes the shack in a narrow, dark, and deserted street such as those shown in the etchings to illustrate melodramatic old novels, a lamentable enclosure which had endured the worst insults of time, entered a laboratory of astonishing simplicity. The floor was a rugged, beaten earth, the walls of ruined plaster, the ceiling of rather shaky laths, and the light came in weakly through dusty windows. It was cold drops of water that were falling from a tap. End quote. It is easier to provide readers with this dramatic description rather than a description of the Curie's discoveries. Marie wants the acknowledgments and credit for their discoveries, but by no means hungers for celebrity status. When she is asked, "Are you Marie Curie?" she responds, "No, you are mistaken." Pierre writes, "Never have we been less at peace. There are days when we have hardly the time to breathe, and to think that we dreamed of living like wild people far from other human beings. When the Curies are out in public, they are the focus of cameras, unabashed stares, and pointed fingers. Strangers come to the laboratory or to their home and look through the windows. When Marie and Pierre are attending a concert or the theater, the press makes snide comments about their out-of-date clothes." As an aside, Marie has a rewarding evening in the honor of her home country. The Curies attend a concert by Ignacio Paderewski. Marie, having heard him play piano at Bronya in Casimir's apartment, now reads the headlines of Paderewski as the most illustrious pianist in the world. Back to the text. France is pretty close to exemplifying too little, too late. Once the Curies are awarded the Nobel Prize, the President of France visits the laboratory for a photo op. Realizing a decrepit shack is hardly fitting for France's world-renowned scientists, a position at the Sorbonne is created for Pierre. but not Marie. And for the Academy of Science in Paris, who has rejected Pierre twice, they will finally open their doors to Pierre, but not Marie. For the school year 1904 and 5, Pierre is offered a professorship at the Sorbonne, still no laboratory. Pierre replies to the offer saying he will not take the position without a laboratory. The Sorbonne agrees and sets aside funding to build the lab and for staff. This offer is for only a few rooms and still does not cover the expenses of buying equipment for the laboratory. The position of chief of laboratory is offered to Marie. It will be the first time she has the official right to be in Pierre's laboratory rather than Pierre asking permission from his supervisors. Marie writes about the frustration of having to fight for a laboratory and says, "One cannot help feel sorrow in realizing that this was a last concession and that actually one of the first French scientists never had an adequate laboratory to work in, and this even though the genius had revealed itself as early as his 20th years." Can we fully imagine the regret of an enthusiastic worker in a great work who is retarded in the realization of his dream by the lack of means? And can we think without a feeling of profound grief of the waste of the nation's greatest asset? End quote. To be a member of the Academy of Sciences, a person who wants to be a candidate must put forward his name for consideration. A candidate, much like a politician, is expected to go and visit the Academy members and solicit their vote. Pierre writes to a friend, "I am not accustomed to this form of activity, demoralizing in the highest degree. I think that nothing is more unhealthy to the spirit than to allow oneself to be occupied with things of this character and to listen to the petty gossip people come to report to you." Pierre is assured the Academy will vote in his favor. This time, the assurance is correct. Pierre is voted in and writes his friend, quote, "I find myself in the Academy without having desired to be there, and without the Academy's desire to really have me. What's the use? In that house they can do nothing simply without intrigues." And later he writes, "I went to the Institute on Monday, but I must really say I don't know what I was doing there. I have nothing to do with any of the members, and the interest of the meetings is null. I feel very clearly that these circles are not mine." Pierre's membership at the Academy means a magazine interview for Marie. The article, tilted toward the traditional role for women, asks Marie if she is also expecting a position at the Academy. The article has this response from Marie, as if quoting her, saying, "Oh, I'm only a woman, nothing but a woman. I will never have a seat under the cupola of the Academy," end quote. When Marie sees the article, she is furious at this concocted answer. She writes the magazine, and they acknowledge that the response is a fabrication, but of course, the magazine has already gone out. In spring of 1904, the Curies continue to struggle with exhaustion. Marie writes to a friend, "The fatigue resulting from an effort which surpassed our strength and which had been imposed upon us by the unsatisfactory physical conditions of our work was increased by the invasion of publicity. The shattering of our voluntary isolation was a cause of real suffering to us and had all the effects of a disaster." That same spring, Marie is 36 years old. She is pregnant. She stops teaching at the school. Drained by all the media attention and having miscarried in her last pregnancy, she spends more time resting. Bronya comes to help Marie. A baby girl, Eve Denise Curie, is born December 6, 1904. Eve is a happy baby, full of energy, and within weeks, Marie is back to her usual busy schedule. In the mornings, she tends to the matter of the house, cares for the children, and then is off to teach and her research. Marie maintains her sense of humor. When a stranger admires baby Eve, Marie responds that she doesn't know where the baby came from and that Eve is an orphan. The joke continues as Marie will refer to Eve as my poor orphan baby. June 1905, the Curies go to Sweden to give the lecture required of Nobel Prize recipients. Pierre is to give the lecture, not Marie. Whether the Curies decided to concede this point or not, Pierre makes clear in the presentation that Marie is full partner in the research, not an assistant. 10 times, Pierre mentions Marie by name in his lecture. Every pronoun is our experiment, not my. When their daughter Irene and son-in-law jointly receive a Nobel Prize in 1935, both give a presentation, and Irene goes first. Some scientists are voicing their concerns about radium. One scientist writes, quote, "Radium and radioactivity have transformed the Earth into a stockhouse stuffed with explosives inconceivably more powerful than any we know of." Pierre also reflects on their concern, becoming the most quoted Nobel speech of all time. Pierre states, quote, "They are also a terrible means of destruction in the hands of the great criminals who lead the peoples toward war. I am among those who think, with Nobel, that humanity will obtain more good than evil from the new discoveries," end quote. As Marie is sitting in the front row of the audience, is she missing her father? 23 years earlier, Vladislav had seen his daughter receive the gold medal, placing first in class at the gymnasium. Now Marie receives another gold medal, the Nobel Prize for Physics. Pierre starts his first lecture at the Sorbonne with a tribute to his previous school. Before a large audience, he gives credit to the school that had employed him. And he says, "I wish to point out here that we made all our researches at the School of Physics and Chemistry of the city of Paris. In all scientific production, the influence of the surroundings in which work is done has a very great importance, and part of the results obtained is due to this influence. For more than 20 years, I have been working at the School of Physics. Schutzenberger, the first director of this school, was an eminent man of science. I remember with gratitude that he procured the means of work for me when I was only an assistant. Later on, he permitted Madame Curie to come and work with me, an authorization which at the time was an innovation far out of the ordinary. I present the directors, Messieurs Louth and Gariel, have kept on the same kindness toward me. The professors of the school and the pupils who have finished their studies constitute a benevolent and productive circle which was very useful to me. It is among the former pupils of the school that we found our collaborators and friends, and I am happy to be able to thank all of them here." Honoring his prior employer and acknowledging their support to not only his research, but for Marie as well, is a poke at the Sorbonne. The proverbial, "you could have heard a pin drop," seems to apply to the moments after Pierre's introductory words. As Pierre and Marie settle at the Sorbonne, both are unassuming and willing to help the students. Pierre knows Marie is the better choice for assistance with math and tells the students to ask her. Marie writes that Pierre, quote, "was always disposed to aid anyone in a difficult situation and even to give of his time, which was the greatest sacrifice he could make," end quote. An assistant remembers the Curies, quote, "a more distinguished instance where husband and wife, with all their mutual admiration and devotion, preserved so completely independence of character in life as well as in science," end quote. Pierre having a chair at the Sorbonne does not enable him to have more free time to work in the laboratory. He writes his friend, quote, "As you have seen, a fortune favors us at this moment, but these favors do not come without worries. We have never been less tranquil than at this moment. There are days when we scarcely have time to breathe." And It is now more than a year since I have been able to engage in any research, and I have no moment to myself. Clearly, I have not yet discovered a means to defend ourselves against this frittering away of our time, which is nevertheless extremely necessary. Intellectually, though, it is a question of life or death. And that ends chapter 6. Thank you.